Flyleaf for hosting us tonight. As all of you are very aware, we have wonderful indie bookstores in our area, but we should not take that for granted. A lot of areas don't even have one indie bookstore. And now more than ever, we need to support our indie bookstores. They're a vital part of our community. So I would urge you to buy something tonight to support Flyleaf. It doesn't have to be one of Jill's books. We would like it to be one of Jill's books, but it could be anything. I'm actually a big fan of their puzzle selection, so if you like puzzles, check that out. And I'm just going to give a shout out to Libro.fm. If you guys are audiobook fans like me, I do a lot of physical therapy, could not do it without audiobooks. If you don't know about Libro.fm, check them out. It's the same service as Audible, but you actually support indie bookstores. I've been a member since the beginning, and my account is linked to Flyleaf. And they're an incredible company. Their customer service is brilliant. So shout out to Libro. And thank you, all of you. Shout out to all of you for coming out. I know it's hard sometimes to get motivated to go out. On a weekday evening, we were just talking over here about how we've come and become hermits since COVID. So thank you for coming out. This is not just a book launch. This is a debut book launch, which is huge. So we should be congratulating Jill. Yes. Authors in waiting, that's what I call it, so I publish, authors in waiting, fantasize about this moment. In my case, I did it for at least 2 decades. And, a lot of writers don't get this far. It's incredibly hard to get published. And my hat especially goes off to Jill for tackling such a taboo subject. I'm pretty sure I've never read about shaken baby syndrome in a novel before, and I think so. I applaud you, and I know that affected your path to publication. And for those of you who don't know, the book is already an award winner, and it only came out today. So Shaken received the Literary Titan Silver Book Award, and you're a finalist, right, for the Wishing Shelf Book Awards. So this is huge. As a debut author, Jill is going to need extra support from you guys. And now, how can you support a debut author? Well, first of all, I see someone here with a phone. If you're taking pictures tonight, post them to social media. Actually, I would recommend you wait till Jill is reading, take pictures of her reading her book. Post to social media, tag Flyleaf, tag Jill, and tag her publisher, Vineleaf Press, because they will see that she's doing stuff. And, most books sell by word of mouth. And so, in the digital age, social media is word of mouth. Another way you can support Jill is if you've read the book, or when you've read the book, post a review. You can post reviews to that big place that we don't talk about that starts with A. And you can also post to, Goodreads, Barnes & Noble, BookBub. If you haven't checked out BookBub and you love reading authors' reviews or anyone's reviews, go to BookBub. It's just all book reviews, nothing else. It's really fun. And one other way that you can support Jill, if you are in a book club, or if you know someone who is in a book club. I've now read this book twice, and let me look at the sticky notes from the second time I read it. I can assure you that this is perfect book club fodder. There is so much meat in this story, and it's not just because of the topic that Jill tackles and the way she tackles it, but because as a reader, while you are reading this book, you ask the best question of all, which is, what would I do in that situation? What if that were me? And that is the joy of fiction, because it allows you to empathize with a situation that you might think you would never be in. I mean, none of us would ever want to think we could hurt a child, right? But things happen, and you don't know. And so there's a lot here to get your teeth around. I really recommend it for book clubs. So we're going to talk for about half an hour, then we're going to open it up for questions. Please feel free to ask us anything about reading, writing, what Jill is working on next. And then, obviously, after we have questions, we're going to have refreshments. Jill has her wonderful giveaway, so please hang around for that. And please, if you haven't already had Jill sign a copy of her book, Jill signed a copy of her book, which you have to buy first. But the first thing that we're going to do is Jill is actually going to read to us. This is when you want to take pictures.
All right, does this work? Okay. Thank you, Barbara, for the very wonderful introduction. That was really quite amazing, so thank you. I knew when I decided to do my book launch, I immediately thought of Barbara because we had read one of her books during our book club, and it was all about motherhood and mental illness and just all the stuff that I talk about in my book. So I was really excited when I asked, and she said yes. And I asked her like a year ago.
Yeah, I did. That was an honor.
Yeah. All right. So I'm just gonna dive right in. Chapter 1. You just dive right in. It gets really intense. So hang on. Chapter 1. Sally. Day 1. Friday, September 7th. Sally knew she wasn't supposed to shake a baby. She saw the message everywhere, on pamphlets, brochures, in baby books, on posters prominently displayed at the doctor's office. Who could miss it? This was a problem for social services. They'd come and take Morgan away. They'd tell her she was a bad mother. But you'd see doting fathers playfully tossing their babies around, flipping them over their shoulders, swinging them in circles, around and around, the babies dizzy with glee. That was no crime. Even Charles played rough with Morgan. He'd saunter down the hall, holding Morgan upside down by his ankles, letting him swing like a pendulum. Where'd Morgie go? Have you seen him? While Morgan exploded into a fit of giggles. Had she crossed the line? Morgan lay in his crib now, curled on his side, snug in his Winnie the Pooh sleep sack, his thumb resting between lax lips. Fast asleep, although his breathing sounded labored, didn't it? Was that a sign? Or could he just be congested? She wanted to shake him awake, to make sure he was all right, to make him laugh. But maybe it was too late. Maybe she caused damage, brain damage, like she'd read in the newspaper the other day, that dad who attacked his toddler with a baseball bat. She couldn't understand how any parent could do that, how anyone could hurt their baby. And yet, here lay little Morgan, her sweet boy, in pain. She knew he was hurting. It had started with another screaming fit, Morgan wailing nonstop for no apparent reason. She tried everything. She gave him his favorite ball, his Elmo. She turned on Wheels on the Bus and sang along. She squatted and quacked like a duck, jumped like a wild chimpanzee, crawled on all fours, and barked like a dog. He stared at her and continued to howl for hours. Hours. Then she snapped, "Shut up!" He paused, taking in a sharp inhale, his face red and splashy and dripping with tears. Then he tilted his head back, opened his mouth wide, and let loose another ear-splitting shriek. "Stop, stop, stop!" Sally repeated, her voice rising higher and higher. She needed him to be quiet for just 1 second. She'd only gotten around 3 hours of sleep last night. Head buzzing, she furiously rubbed her eyes, trying to think straight. The cat meowed and pawed and licked at the dirty stack of dishes. The washing machine whirled and clanked from down the hall. A cockroach scuttled across the carpet. The TV blasted, "If You're Happy and You Know It." Her phone rang and vibrated like it was having a seizure on the counter. In one quick swoop, Morgan was in her arms. "Shh, please stop crying. I need you to stop." It was just a little shake, a warning. "Please stop. Please let mommy have a break. Please let mommy think. Please, 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 please." But Morgan didn't stop. He screamed even louder, snot sputtering into his open, wailing mouth. Her heart pounded, sweat pooled under her arms, her legs weakened. She thought of carrying him downstairs, exiling him to the basement again. Last time she'd left him down there for several hours, alone in his playpen with only a bottle of milk and his Elmo. She didn't know what to do during that time. She'd sat on the couch, stared at the wall, then studied the checkered blue and white squares on her socks. It had been quiet, unusual, eerie, but quiet, really quiet. And when she'd finally gone to retrieve him, he was quiet. Morgan was quiet, red-faced, teary-eyed, exhausted, quiet. Had he screamed and cried and protested in the dank, musty basement? Sally had no idea. She didn't set up a baby monitor. She didn't even leave the door cracked open. Charles recently asked about the playpen in the basement. Simple answer, she was storing it there. He shrugged his acceptance. He didn't investigate. He didn't ask why it remained set up with a sheet inside. Something about the playpen made her feel guilty. Later, after he'd mentioned it, she wrestled it into the basement storage closet, shoving it against the caked bottles of cleaning supplies and moldy mops, leaning her body into the door until it latched shut. Out of sight, out of mind. She even contemplated getting rid of it, hauling it over to Goodwill. But in the end, she couldn't. Because every time Morgan had one of his animalistic episodes, she needed a way out, a moment of peace. But today, with Morgan's face inches from her own, she hadn't made it to the basement. Instead, she grasped her baby firmly under his armpits, his legs kicking and arms waving in fury. Just a little over 1 year on this planet, and he already had that much vigor and defiance in his lungs, in his limbs, in his soul. He said, "Stop, stop, stop, stop!" Sally screamed so loud her throat hurt and her ears rang. She squeezed her eyes shut, and when she opened them, Morgan was completely silent, his head hanging limply to one side, his eyelids fluttering to stillness. She hadn't even realized she'd been shaking him. And now he was quiet, but not the good kind of quiet. "Oh God," she gasped. "Oh my God, my baby." She needed to call 911. Should she do mouth to mouth? She pressed her ear to his chest and held her breath. She heard a ragged, gasping sound. He was breathing. She exhaled, then quickly carried him down the hall to his room, changed his soggy diaper, stroked his forehead, zipped him into his soft sleep sack. She clutched him to her chest, his head nestled in the crook of her neck. She paced, waiting, wondering what to do next. She longed for him to howl again. Her stomach twisted. She'd hurt Morgan. What would she tell Charles? What would they do with her? He just needs sleep, she told herself. Sleep will make everything better. She placed him in his crib, tucking his tattered Elmo under his arm. His breathing was raspy, but steady. She watched him for several minutes, her knuckles gripping the edge of the crib before forcing herself away. She stumbled down the basement stairs, tripping over an old tennis racket and Charles's bowling bag. She yanked open the door to the storage closet. Morgan's playpen filled almost every inch of the space. She'd brought him down here. She should have brought him down here, let him scream his heart out, and then he'd be exhausted, angrily exhausted, but still conscious. After crawling into the creaky playpen, she tugged the door shut. It was tight, but she fit, curled into a ball. It was dark and still and quiet. So very quiet. Her own sobs finally broke the silence as she cried herself to sleep. That's it.
Pretty amazing. So obviously the first thing that I want to ask you is about what I call the story seed, because I'm always fascinated, why I chose to write about postpartum obsessive compulsive disorder in The Promise Between Us, but why shaken baby syndrome?
Yeah, so the idea came to me actually quite a long time ago. I was 17 years ago. I was 27 at the time, and I was doing this writing course in New Zealand, working on my young adult novel, and I was on a break for that because it was getting reviewed by my classmates, and I needed a new idea. And I was at the doctor's office and saw a poster that said "Never Shake a Baby." And at 27, way before I had children, I remember thinking, who shakes a baby? Like, who does that? And I was like, well, clearly people do, otherwise there wouldn't be a poster. And I felt this immediate compassion for somebody that would lose control and hurt their baby. What an awful thing to then have to live with for the rest of your life. And I wanted to get into a mother's head where she's trying the best she can and just snaps and does the unthinkable. So that afternoon, I wrote the first chapter, and it has been pretty much untouched from how I wrote it 17 years ago. But at that time, I couldn't focus very long on one project, so I jumped from project to project, so I put it aside and didn't come back to it till I needed to read something at my writers group in the summer of 2019. And it was then that the group was like 20 people, they exploded, and everybody had something to say about that opening chapter. There was opinions about socioeconomic status, mental health, single mothers saying that could have been me. I felt at the breaking point so many times, and it was the leader of the writers group that leaned over and said, like, if you can get such an emotional response from everybody, like nobody was blasé, nobody was like, oh, it was okay. You know, everybody had something to say. He's like, you need to drop everything else you're doing and write this book right now.
And what is so interesting to me, having read it twice, is that, you know, when the first time I started reading it, and, you know, I thought, you know, on the first page that the protagonist has shaken her baby. That's not a surprise. It's not a shocker. And I thought, oh, it's going to be, you know, a family drama. But no, it's a thriller. It reads as a thriller. It's a page turner. There are twists. And that's what was so incredible to me, that it wasn't quite what I expected. But I love the way that Jill just unraveled everything that happened from that moment through not only the characters' actions, because this one terrible event draws in other people. I mean, if you've looked at the back of the book, you know that the babysitter gets accused at one point, and her mother gets involved. And so it's not only, you know, the event that pulls in other people, but it's the way that you peel back the characters' backstories. I mean, Sally, bless her, has a hell of a lot going on in her backstory, in her life. And then also the decisions that they make. And the decisions that they make keep getting worse. And you're actually reading it going, it's like watching a horror movie, right? When they go, don't go into the basement. No, don't do that, Sally. So you had this great chapter. And then when you actually started fleshing out the story, did you know you were writing a thriller? Or was that part of the journey, the surprise?
I think it was part of the journey. I was reading some books at the time that was like Gone Girl and Girl on the Train. And I felt like the thriller kind of elements kind of infiltrated my writing. But I was also part of this writing group, and every time I would submit the chapter, you know, we'd read it. I'd read a chapter once a month. And when I ramped it up, the more I ramped it up, everybody was getting more and more excited. And the times where it was just like, oh, ho, ho, people were like, no, give us more, give us more. And it was a really great writers group, but it felt like at times, you know, they really wanted me to go over the top. And then I'd go over the top and they'd be like, no, too far. But I feel like it did kind of take on a life of its own with becoming more thriller. I will say that when I was pitching agents, and the agent that I finally got after 10 months of querying and 55 queries, the agent that I finally got read it in one day, loved it. But she said, oh, you know, you have a very soft ending, you know, and I kind of tied things up.
I was going to ask you about the ending.
Yeah, she said, oh, you have a very...
No spoilers.
No, I won't spoil anything. But she said, oh, you know, I had a very soft ending. I tied everything up too nicely. And she's like, no, if this is going to be a thriller, you know, we got to go darker. We got to get some twists in there. And so we brainstormed, and then I was like, oh, gosh, it just is like so far from what I thought. And then when my publisher got it, they're like, yeah, we really like it, but the ending, I don't know, you know, it's a little too much. And so I was like, oh my God. And so, you know, so then it just evolved. It evolved over time. And I feel the ending finally became kind of a hybrid of what I wanted, what my agent wanted, what the publisher wanted. And it's kind of, you know, a mix of stuff. But so my agent definitely helped guide some of it into more of that thriller category that I'd been, you know, incorporating stuff. But then she was like, oh yeah, let's do this.
When you went out on submission, when you were querying agents, you had a different ending?
Yes.
Cool. That's really cool.
Yeah. No, I think I revised the ending literally 20 different times.
Wow.
Over the course of
it's an ending that stays with you.
It's interesting because some of the reviews will say people were like, The ending dragged down too long. And people said, I wanted more of the ending. A lot of unanswered questions, and then other people say, the ending is perfect.
So,
I mean, at this point, it is what it is. But I do have, there's a few things that I was intending to do with the ending, and when I've talked to some people, they're like, I got that, and I'm like, whew, and other people are like, no, I didn't get that. And I'm like, oh. So, after you read it, if you have problems with the ending, message me, we'll talk.
So I just want to, we're going to talk about general research in a moment, but I just want to talk about character research. And I mean, obviously, you didn't shake your babies. So, I mean, what experiences did you draw on as a new mother? Because there was one part when, it's fairly early on, and it's a little bit of a backstory. I think it's before she's shaken, Morgan, isn't it? And Sally is basically pleading with her husband not to go to work, not to leave her. And I went, oh my God, I remember that. I mean, my son is 30 years old. He dated this lady's daughter for a while in high school. And I have a distinct memory. We had just moved, we'd only been down in Durham for like 6 months. We were living in an apartment. We felt like we were living like grad students. We just had a baby. We didn't have any support. My husband was a distinguished professor down here, which is why we moved. So he was like busier than God. I was now suddenly a stay-at-home mom with a baby on a third floor apartment, and he was packing to go out of town. My husband Zach was 9 weeks old. And I read that and I went, oh my God, I remember sitting on the bed in that grotty apartment crying as he packed his suitcase saying, please don't leave me. And so, I mean, was there anything like that you folded into the...
Yeah, I mean, I think the story took on a lot more depth when I became a mom, because I wrote it initially when I didn't have kids. I mean, I worked as a nanny, so I knew how babies could wail and scream, but and I will assure you my children are okay. Sometimes people ask. When I was doing research, especially with doctors, they're like, are your children okay?
Is this really
It's for a book. It's for a book. But yeah, so I feel that when I became a mom, it took on a whole new light. And I would go to these parenting groups, and all the moms would vent about the loneliness and the arguments with the spouses, and arguing over dishes and laundry, and the spouses being like, what do you do all day? You're just playing with a baby. And the isolating loneliness. Yeah. And when I first had my my baby, who's now 8, my husband, was the sole breadwinner, and we had no family around. And he was just gone. Long, long days, long, long hours. And I just remember that restlessness. Like it's just me in this creature that I have to keep doing everything for, and like I can't even shower. I'm like, I just want to take a shower. And a friend would come by, and I'd be like, I'm gonna go to the bathroom, and I would just sit in there for like half an hour. Just be like, quiet, just nice and quiet.
Well, and I think the other thing too about Sally that I don't think this is a spoiler, but she's very young, and she's had a really hard life, and she is so isolated, and she's not actually married to the father of the child, and he's a lot older, and she kind of broke up the marriage, and so there are lots of reasons to hate her. And, so she doesn't want to go to mom groups because, she feels like a bad person. And she's such a tragic figure, and she does make so many bad decisions throughout most of these sticky notes going, I was going, Sally, don't do that, please. But you understand why she does what she does. Imagine being 21 years old, home alone with a baby who never stops crying. And Morgan is 14 months old, so this is not a newborn. She's been dealing with this for a while. He's a very difficult baby, and she's got no one. She's got no support for a while. Her husband's mother was there, but that was it. And so one thing I did want to ask, I was intrigued, why 14 months with Morgan? Did you want to sort of make it obvious that she'd been dealing with this for a while?
It's interesting because nobody's actually brought that up yet. And I was like always, like just always curious why nobody brought that up, because it's about the shaken baby, but he's a toddler.
Yeah.
And the big risk of shaken baby is the first 12 months. And so he's technically like 13 and a half months. And so I pushed it a little over the edge. And part of it was one of like, I wanted to have the buildup. So it's like a whole, it's been a year and she hasn't had support. She hasn't kind of made friends and gone to play groups. She's just been isolated. So part of that is like the buildup of the time. But also just to kind of like, I wanted it to be about her losing control in the aftermath, but for it to still be digestible by the reader. And there was just something about, shaking like an absolute fragile newborn is just so horrific. Yeah. Not that I'm saying it's okay to like shake a toddler, but somehow I just felt if I made him just like right on that edge, it just kind of lessened it a little bit, and I felt like would keep more readers there, as opposed to just being like, oh my gosh, a newborn, I'm done. But also to kind of break some of the stigma. Like we often talk about postpartum depression and people think like it's just within the first few months. But I mean, it can last years and nobody like talks about that. And I know that when I had my babies in the hospital, when the midwife said something about, people are offering you like meals and support. Like, say, can you bring that 6 months or a year from now? Because she's like, everyone comes and supports you during the newborn stage. But a year from now, when your baby has flu and you have the flu and your husband's on a work trip and you're just on the floor crying in a puddle of tears, who's going to bring you a lasagna? Like, they did it all during the first few months. So part of me was kind of wanting to kind of break out of just like the newborn stage is hard, but all of it's hard. And we need support all along.
Yeah, and I think it is interesting that it does shine a light on maternal mental health beyond what most people would think of as the postpartum era. And it's interesting when you say, it was maybe as a writer you couldn't get your head around her actually shaking a newborn. Mm-hmm. I kind of had that with The Promise Between Us because. So I have a young mother who abandons her baby because she thinks she's a monster. So it's based on the premises, can you be a good mother if you abandon your baby? She was, in the prologue, she is trapped in the nightmare of postpartum OCD, which manifests as harm OCD. So it's sort of like, it's sort of like the poor relation of shaken baby syndrome, because what OCD does is it floods your brain with intrusive, unwanted, horrific thoughts about things that you would never do, but this nasty little voice in your head tells you you would do it. So what's the worst thing that could happen to a new mother? Someone hurting your baby. But then OCD goes one further to say, aha, but what if the problem, the danger, is not a stranger, it's you? And then it shows you dropping your baby down the stairs or shaking your baby or something like that. But the original story, which came from something within the OCD community, was about pedophile OCD. So if I just explained harm OCD, so imagine what pedophile OCD is, right? Imagine the images that your brain gives you if you have pedophile OCD, and that can manifest in the postpartum stage. And I sat down to write it, and I thought, I can't go there. Mm-hmm. I cannot make my brain do this. So that's sort of interesting. So what is your theory about why Morgan has these incredible temper tantrums, these screaming fits at 14 months? Do you think that there's something, some future mental illness that's going to manifest?
Yeah, I mean, I feel that is one of the things is that there's like an underlying thing that there is something going on, and that, she doesn't have the support for somebody to say, like, let's get him checked out. Like, why is he over one and right. Still screaming all day?
Because it's not colic at 14 months, mm-hmm. is it? There's something else. Mm-hmm. And my brain was going, mood swings. Is this sort of a precursor to a mood disorder, maybe? Mm-hmm. I don't know if your brain went there. That's where my brain went.
Yeah, no, I mean, I did intend that there's something kind of underlying to start with. And that, she's so young and her partner's working long hours. Nobody's addressing it. I think that they just accept, oh, he just screams all the time. And because he's still in that early stage, I think the doctor is just like, oh, colicky, blah, blah, blah. Even though he's clearly, moved out of that stage and needs a deeper assessment, but she doesn't push for it because she's drowning in her overwhelm. So
yeah, and isolated comes back to new moms being isolated.
Mm-hmm.
So how about can you tell us a bit about your actual research? I did, because there's a legal aspect obviously too.
Yeah, I did spend hours and hours researching. My cousin is a social worker, so I talked extensively with her about when a social worker would get involved. I talked to a detective friend extensively about what the legal procedures would be, and he said, oh, he does deal with some of these cases. And really, both the detective and social worker was amazing. They said they really want to try to get the kids back to the parents. They're not, I think so much of Sally's perspective, they're just going to rip him away and throw me in jail. And she's, kind of spirals into that thinking. And the detective was like, no, we really want the kids to get back with the parents and them to do.
Also, her age comes into that.
Yes.
I felt that her spirals came from the fact she's only 21.
From the age, yes. And I talked to nurses and doctors. In fact, Mariah over here was worked as an ER nurse, and so I talked to her extensively about what would happen in all these different situations, doctor's visits, at what point would the authorities be called, what would be the red flags. And and the research, it never seemed to end, because every single round of beta reading, people were like, well, it was, what about this? And then I was like, we go back to my sources. And then the developmental editor, she had questions. And then the very, very end, I was like, we're on the home stretch. Then the line editor was like, well, would the social worker really address them by their first name? I was like, for the love of God. I was like, if I change it, I'm going to have to change how the social worker refers throughout the whole thing. So then I text my cousin, I'm like, we need to have another talk. She's like, well, if you just say, like, you just add a sentence that they say, Mr. blah, 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 and they say, no, just call me Charles. She's like, problem fixed. I was like, but it was like all these little
all
details.
The little things. It's all the little details, because if you get it wrong, a reader's going to pick up on it, and you can research everything. I was down the rabbit hole once researching groundhog behavior, a small thing in the novel of my heart that never got published, The Gin Club. And you can spend hours doing that, but I just thought, if I don't get this right, someone is going to read this and say, that's not what groundhogs do. They don't behave that way. And it's interesting because, sometimes a member of my extended family once said to me, well, Barbara, just imagine, it could be so much worse. You could write historical fiction, then you'd actually have to do research. And I started thinking, so he thinks I don't do any research for contemporary fiction? How does he think I live in the head of a neuroscientist who's a recovering addict, who was the heroine of my last novel that also didn't get published?
The research is and I really went above and beyond, but I will say, I did have someone, I used some local stuff, so there is some like Durham landmarks and things like that, and I did have someone local who knows me say, this wouldn't have been handled at Durham Regional Hospital. They would have transferred to Duke.
I like the references to Durham
I know,
Regional
but I was
Hospital.
like, I didn't know, and I guess all the medical people I talked to, like nobody spotted that, but she did. But it's okay. It doesn't really matter in the end.
Well, the other interesting thing is that you handle the multi-point of view really seamlessly, and sometimes it goes just a little bit back in time and then comes back in. So there's a lot of weaving between the different characters and the actual timelines. How did you find that? Was that fun? Did that seem intuitive to you? Was there one character that was easier to write than another character?
Yeah, I mean, I made the decision to have 4 characters because the Sally chapters were just so intense and so heavy, and a lot of people wouldn't like her. And some people sympathized with her, other people just like couldn't stand her when I shared it with my writers group. And so I was always trying to find ways to make her like a little bit more relatable, but also a whole book from her perspective just seemed like way too much. And so, you know, I knew I wanted it to be with the babysitter, her and the babysitter going back and forth. But their voices ended up sounding kind of similar in the early drafts because Alyssa, the babysitter, is almost 16 and Sally's 21. And really, you know, that's not that far apart in age difference. So then I brought in Charles, which is Morgan's father. And then I also had Alyssa's mother, Mandy, the babysitter's mother. And through all the drafts, I always kind of wondered, does Mandy actually need to be here? Like, so I often had a hard time.
The detective has a chapter towards the end.
Yes.
Someone else has a chapter.
Yeah, there are like some random rogue characters chapters at the end. But yeah, I often wondered, like, does Mandy actually need to be here? And at times I thought, I'm just gonna cut her. But then I'd ask my beta readers and they're like, no, she adds something. And because she was a single mother herself and had her own struggles, there's just some of her backstory that just gives the story a little bit more depth.
Yeah, I was going to say it makes it richer.
Yeah.
Because of her backstory, I think.
Yeah.
And the fact that she's trying to protect her child too. And all the decisions that Sally makes that are so awful after this has happened are, ironically, because she's trying to protect her child. You know, she's trying to still be her child's mother. It's just such a tragic situation. So I've just realized we've been talking for about 40 minutes. So would you like to open up for questions? Or does anyone have a question for Jill? We can keep talking because I have more questions. But is there anything you'd like to ask Jill about her writing process, her journey to publication, what she's working on now?
What are you working on now?
Great question. Thank you.
Yes, I'm working on a young adult thriller mystery, and it is a 14-year-old. It starts with this girl at 14, almost 15, who loses both her parents in an accident, and they say it was just a car accident, but she has little clues that she begins to think that it wasn't an accident and that her parents were murdered. So together with her friends at boarding school, she goes on this mission to try to uncover clues. And the more clues she uncovers, the more she realizes her own life is in risk. So it's
Nice.
It is a page turner. I've had it go. I finished really quite a lot of it and had it go through one round of beta reading, including a teen reader for the young adult to see if I was getting the young adult voice right and things like that. And it's one of those, it's very different because in Shaken, right away the mom did it. So in this, you're kind of like, who did it? Who did it? And then there's a few other crimes that pop up. So then you're like, is it the same person? Or are they different people? And I was really impressed with myself that at the end, my beta readers didn't know. They were all surprised. They're like, none of them could guess it. And I was like, I did it. I did it. Because when you read a book and you're like, oh, it's got to be this person, it's got to be this person. And then you get to the end and you're like, I never saw that coming. And so I'm sitting there thinking, oh, it's so obvious. It's so obvious. And at the end, they're like, no, we didn't see it coming. I was like, I really did it.
So how does your agent feel about you following a domestic thriller with young adults?
Yeah, I know. And so in the publishing world, this is I'm doing everything wrong. You're supposed to.
Actually, I think I've already done that. So
yeah, I'm just like going just totally backwards because you're supposed to follow up with a similar. I'm supposed to do another domestic thriller, probably motherhood, along the same lines. So everyone who read Shaken will just go buy the other book. And that's what you're supposed to do. So I talked to my agent. I was like, I've written this young adult book, and like, should I scratch it and write another thriller? And she's like, I'm with a small press, a small publisher. And she's like, you were with HarperCollins. Yes, I would tell you that. I would tell you exactly that's what you need to do. But, we're just kind of in uncharted territory here because you started with a small press, and who knows what'll happen next. Nice. So since you've written the book and people like it, then finish the revisions and get it to me. So that's where we're at right now.
Part of the reason I asked that question, because I'm looking at the cover for The In-Between Hour, which was my second book, set here in Orange County. And that was part of a 2-book deal with Mirror that's part of HarperCollins. And it was in the first draft when my agent sold my debut novel, and it was a ghost story. And my editor said, she cannot follow up women's fiction with a ghost story. She has to make it women's fiction. I went, but it's a ghost story. And so I literally threw out 90% of the manuscript and started over, but there are still little echoes of the original ghost story in there that I couldn't get rid of. So yeah, I mean, it is real. It is, you have to kind of write what you're told to write. If you're on contract, which I wasn't writing a novel at a time.
I will say that in my writers group, the people who read Shaken and who have read my young adult book like the young adult book. So I think it appeals to a similar audience, even though it is for a young adult market. I think that it appeals, and part of it...
It's still the same genre. It's still...
Yeah, I think it's just sort of like the same kind of pace, the thriller, edge of your seat sort of thing. And I do, this young adult book, I have it set back in time, so it's sort of like late 80s, early 90s, and so a lot of my adult readers...
Historical fiction now.
Really?
I can tell
you. my adult readers have loved the things like the lava lamps and stuff like that.
Oh,
and,
so cool.
You know, making out under the bleachers at the basketball game. And
more things to research.
Yeah.
But as you were talking about it, I was going to say, it did seem like a really nice fit with this.
Yes.
So I had a question about pacing. Like when you sat down to write some of these scenes initially, was the pacing there? Was it like that first draft, or was it something that you really had to edit into like multiple revisions of?
Yeah, I definitely had to edit a lot. So I know in the writing world, we talk about the people who are the plotters and plot everything out, and then there's the pantsers who just like fly by the seat of their pants. And I'm definitely more of a pantser, which means that you have a lot more fun in the writing process, but you have a lot more work to do in the revision process. So I had, in one of the early drafts, I'm embarrassed to say, I had a 5,000 word chapter where Alyssa goes to summer camp, the babysitter. She just goes to summer camp. You know, it has nothing to do with like Morgan and babysitting. It was like 5,000 words, and she's hanging out, making friends, and learning to go like water skiing and all this fun stuff. I just thought it was a great chapter, and my writers group was like, what the heck? No, it's just like 5,000 words just cut. There was like, I couldn't save anything from that chapter. So it was just like a tangent. They're like, well, this has nothing to do with the storyline.
That was character research.
That's true.
There you go. And
Yes.
I bet her character was richer for the chapter that you...
Yes.
5,000 word chapter.
Yes.
As far as character development goes, I know you said you were a pantser, not a planner. But after writing, say, the first long draft, did you do those exercises where, like, what's my character eat? What's her favorite color? Or was it more like it was just already, like, her backstory was sort of like implanted already on the page for you? I'm just curious.
Yeah, I mean, I actually I never found those exercises really helpful of like, what's your favorite color? Because I don't feel like it adds a lot of depth to the character. But I would write little notes like, you know, she has a button nose and she has glasses and she tugs at her hair and she, you know, bites her nails. So I would have like little notes of characters, what, you know, their little tics and the way they think. But what I found really helped when I was going through multiple revisions is I would read all of one character's chapters in a row. So instead of alternating, I would just read all of Sally's chapters without anybody else. And then I could like really pick up like, what are the words she says? What are the phrases? What are the colors she wears? Does she wear her hair down or up? Does she talk fast or slow? And then I would do all of the Alyssa's chapters. And by doing that, that was the first time that I finally started getting feedback that Sally and Alyssa didn't sound the same, because I kept getting feedback. They sound the same, they sound the same. And then all of a sudden they're like, they sound different. What did you do? And I was like, that's all I did. I guess that worked. And so I feel like by reading all those chapters all together, just that character, really diving in, I got more of a sense of who they were. But I didn't do like big, massive character sketches. I I think in my writing process, because I would go off on these tangents, I would sometimes write scenes that never got used. And that was helpful, like getting kind of a sense of what would Alyssa do at summer camp. And somehow that kind of, ended up getting into the main story. But yeah, I mean, I feel like it was a long process to get there. I really applaud the people who plot it all out and have everything figured out ahead of time, because it just seems like a more efficient way to do things. But I like the mystery of kind of having it unfold.
Also, I mean, every writer has his or her their own process. So whatever works for you is the bottom line. Mm-hmm. If it helps you to figure out, what a character eats for breakfast, go for it. It's just however they manifest in your brain, I think. Mm-hmm. And the more time you spend with them, and this is why I love being a pantser. Although I think I'm kind of a little bit of a hybrid. I think when I was on contract, because I couldn't go off on every tangent, I reined myself in a bit more. Then I went off contract, and now I'm off kind of doing my organic thing. But the more that you write a character, the more you hear them. Mm-hmm. And you realize, no, he would never say that. I did that this morning at 6:30 this morning. I was going, no, Graydon wouldn't say it that way. Mm-hmm. So you just get a sense of...
Yeah, they really become real. I mean, in the end, I would have dreams. There would be dreams of my characters. And I'd wake up in the middle of the night and quickly jot down something. But they were like fully there, just fully developed, really fleshed out, like you just see them on the street.
We have really interesting lives. We don't get out very much.
Joyce is...
We hang out with imaginary friends.
Yeah.
The two of us sitting here are part of your original writers group. And what happened is COVID happened and we disbanded. There was some try to stay on the computer, but it's not the same as people who are writers sitting around a table and sharing their writing and listening to and giving feedback to whoever was reading that night. It was a very valuable experience, obviously, because you mentioned it like 7 times.
Yes.
So I'm wondering, what substitute is there for that kind of experience? As you all know, COVID has really changed our lives. And very often sharing our writing is all computer-based. And you talked about beta readers. Where do you find beta readers? Can you help us in telling us, after our group disbanded, where was your outreach?
Yeah, well, I did stay for a while for the online group, and I did share all the chapters in my young adult group through the online group, which took 2 years because it was like a chapter a month.
So you found it just as helpful?
I found it was helpful. I did miss the in-person connection, so there was something lost with that. But then also, Linda here from the writers group, we came up with this idea of a beta plus group where members from that writers group, we formed into little pods. And then we would, everybody would share their manuscript, and then you would have to sign up to read 3 other manuscripts throughout that year. And you would read them in advance, the whole manuscript, and you'd leave comments and then write up a little report, and then everyone would do a 2-hour, that your pod would get on for a 2-hour Zoom session and discuss your book in depth. So I did that last year with my young adult book and had 6 beta readers all leaving comments in the Google Doc, 6 reports that were like from 1 to 10 pages each, talking about character development and plot. And it was like really kind of it was like as if you'd pay for a manuscript critique, but it was all free because we were trading. And then we'd get on for the Zoom, and you'd use the Zoom to kind of brainstorm more. Like, so I had some plot holes in my story, so I was like, okay, so nobody believed this part. Like, what could I do to make this more believable? And we do a lot of brainstorming. So I thought that was a really great model because we really got in depth with our work. But also because we were all leaving our comments within one Google Doc, you got to learn kind of how other people were critiquing. I would read the other people's reports was like, oh wow, I hadn't actually thought of that when I was reading that story. So we sort of learned a lot from being in that critiquing process together, but you just got so much in-depth feedback as opposed to before I was doing like one chapter a month. So it was a very, very slow process. And here everybody read it all within a month and gave you feedback.
Could you write that up and describe it and send it in your newsletter?
Yeah. Well, and I've had to take a break from the group just because my book had already gone through the beta round, and then I was spending all of my free time is basically marketing for this book and promotion and stuff like that. But I know even if the group itself doesn't have space for more, the model itself, you can just find a group of 4 or 5 writers and say, hey, let's form our own little beta group this year. And then, the thing is, you just have to have, everybody in the group has to have a manuscript that's more or less ready to submit at some point in the coming year.
And I would just add, a beta reader doesn't have to be a writer.
Mm-hmm.
My BFF, who is a voracious reader, has always been my beta reader. Bless her, she read the first manuscript that never saw the light of day, thank God. But if you're going to do that, that person needs to understand they're not there to be nice to you. They're not there to be your friend and say, oh, this is lovely. No, they're there to take you down. They are there to pick up on everything, and she's brutal. I love her, but she's brutal. She doesn't mince her words, and she'll give it back to me and it's covered in red, but she wants a hard copy, and I say to my husband, I don't think I can go through this again. But her comments are brilliant. Even she'll pick up on things like, I'm nearly always writing American characters, but every now and again my brain, I've lived in the States for 37 years, my brain kicks out an Englishism or a Barbaraism, which is actually even worse. And I don't even realize that I'm writing an American person who just said something English, and she picks up on everything like that. So you can, if you know someone who's a great reader and is a good enough friend to be brutal, that's what you need. And
I will say, like, the honesty is what counts, because everything. You don't want a group of people that are like, oh, this is great. Well, no, it needs, you want your manuscript to be at the stage where it needs a little bit more work, and you need to push it to that final stage. And one of the people who read a lot, she helped me a lot with this book, and then she read beta read my young adult book last year, Wanda Freeman, who's not here today, but when she wrote up her report, she said, here's all the good stuff, and laid it all out, and she goes, now, go grab yourself a box of tissues. Here's the bad stuff. And it was good. It was very, very valid.
And the other thing is, play devil's advocate, you can have too much feedback. Because you need to be able to listen to you and your story. And so I've always worked with the premise that I need 3 beta readers, and they've actually, until the last manuscript, always been the same beta readers. But with 3, you know that, like, if one person picks up on something and you think, well, I'm not really sure about that. But if you have 2 and they both pull on the same loose thread, it doesn't matter if they have a different answer. It's not up to them to fix the problem. They've identified a problem. It's up to you to fix the problem. Think, okay, why are they both tripping over this scene? What did I do wrong here? So I always go with that. If 2 people pick up on something, then I know I've got an issue.
You said that you're in cancer, so you discover things as you go. You cut the summer camp chapter, the ending changed. What else did you discover, or what else surprised you? What was the biggest change from the first draft of Shaken to the Shaken that we hold in our hands tonight?
Yeah, I feel like it people will say, like, well, what did you intend to happen? What did you intend for the ending to be? And I was like, I don't know, I was just along for the ride. And so I feel like what I was really surprised about is that it just got messier than I ever expected it to be. But I liked it that way because I felt that it's very much like true life, that it's not like everybody's all redeemable and happy ending at the end. So I feel like if I'd had a well planned out plot, I might have said, well, then this happens, and then here's the rising, and then here's the redemption, and then I would have been kind of stuck to that, and then instead there was just all these kind of like roller coasters and twists along the way. And in fact, actually, one of the reviews I just got recently that I really loved is the person said they just kept trying to find the character, who's the really good character that I'm going to hold on to, and then they realized, no, it's all a mess. But they said, then they realized that it was just so true to life and that they really loved that in the end. And so I think that I found more of that kind of in touch with the dysfunctional and complicated side of people, and that none of my characters ended up being completely perfect or 100% redeemable. And I don't think I would have gotten that if I had plotted it all out ahead of time.
So I think we're kind of running out of time here because we still have to do the giveaway. Do we have one last question? Anyone have one last question?
I have questions. How in the world did you do all this with children?
Yes, that is a good question. So I picked this up in the summer of 2019, but then was deep in it during the pandemic.
Yes.
And my kids during the pandemic, when I was really head down editing and revising, my kids were 2 and 3, stuck at home 24/7 with no babysitters and no help, and just around the clock chaos. My husband, who's back there, was bless you. My husband was working nonstop, but I will say he is absolutely amazing. And what he would do, because he runs a tutoring business, and a lot of it was online, and so there was no rhyme or reason to his schedule. But he'd come out and he'd say, "I have an hour break." And I would just drop all the toys and run into the office, and he'd take over the chaos. And I was like, it's really amazing what you can get done in an hour.
Yeah, actually, I would say that. I used to do great. So my third novel, Goodreads Choice Awards nominee, I wrote huge chunks of that in a parking lot in Carborough while my son was in his Tuesday afternoon guitar lesson. Seriously, because you've got no distraction. You're just in a car in a parking lot, and you go, right, I've got half an hour, I'm going to make it count. It's kind of amazing what you can do. And I look back and I think, how did I do that?
Well, I think also in the pandemic, there was like a certain craziness from being isolated, but there was also nothing happening. So I wasn't like, there were no birthday parties, there were no like regular doctor checkups, there were no dinner out with friends, it was like nothing. So that year of the pandemic, Thanksgiving 2020, it was like nowhere to go. I worked 9 to 5 in the office writing my novel. Then Christmas Eve, New Year's Day of 2021. I was in the office the whole day because my husband had no clients. And I came out to eat. He had all the food cooked, and then I would say, I'd come out and I'd be like, oh, it's just all crap. I don't know what I'm doing. He's like, eat your dinner, go back in there.
And it worked. So bless you.
And I feel that now it's actually way harder. My kids are 7 and 8 now, and I feel like it's so much harder because all of a sudden on a weekend I'm like, well, we got 3 birthday parties to go to, and we got, it was just your life is just filled up again. And there was something I kind of miss about having nothing to do so that my writing could take priority. But I was very fortunate during that time because I was working some as freelance writer, and one of my main gigs went under, and so I didn't have another main gig. And I said to my husband, "Oh, I gotta search," and he's like, "No, we'll be poor. Just spend some time, like focus on your novel. Just get it done." And so, I really was fortunate that I was given that time and space for it to happen.
Amazing partners make all the difference. They really do. And supportive partners. Jill, just to wrap it up, how would you like to handle the giveaway?
So we actually will have the basket first, which has a free copy of my book and Barbara's book, and a shaken mug, a pen, and some treats. So we could do that one first. Does everyone have a raffle ticket? I think we must. Can we give out one? Yeah. Raise your hand if you don't have a raffle ticket, and Alex can come. So you don't.
Awkward.
Discussion. I feel like I'm just talking for
I know, this is the thing, I was having fun. So you? Alright.
I know. Yeah, no, it's good to stop on a
Anybody else need a raffle ticket? Woohoo!
Lauren, do you want a raffle ticket?
Alright.
So do I draw it? Yeah, go for it. Huh? Yeah, I'll draw. Okay.
Drum roll.
All right, this is for the basket. All right. 379173. Yeah. Now you got like an extra copy of the book.
Makes a great gift.
All right. The next one are a pair of the shaken book earrings that you can see that I'm wearing. I got these on Etsy from Belle's Book Corner. Really great service. You just upload your full wrap of your book, and they make them into these cool little earrings. So I wanted to do a separate one for these, just since they're so special, and hopefully somebody will get them who wears earrings. Otherwise, you can pass it on to someone else. All right. 379187. Yay! There you go. Do you wear earrings? Yeah. So, before we cut the cake, I do want to make sure we get a good